Well, hey, John. Welcome to another episode of Security Brothers. I'm Rocket Gilio, your co-host, and on with me is, of course, the one and only John Gilio,
Hey, hey,
real brother from the same mother. And yeah, we're on for another episode. John, what's going on, dude?
not too much. Making weird faces, getting myself ready, waking myself up.
Yeah, we might have to put that in the episode. We'll see. Maybe we'll put that at the end. It'll be like an Easter egg,
Yep,
It's
yep.
like albums when we were children. You'd like listen to the album, and it'd be you get to the last song. It ends after 3 minutes, but it just keeps playing and playing, and your CD's spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're like, "Whoa,
Whoa,
what's going on?"
CD.
I know,
How old are
CD.
you?
And, and with your cassette tape, that would happen too,
There
so,
you go. That's what we
and,
used to do.
records even. I wasn't that old, I didn't really need
Not that old.
records.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not quite there.
But anyway. But, old technology has a way of sticking around. I didn't plan that intro, but, it happens, and,
I think it's perfect. I think it worked out really well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So today, top of mind for me was just this idea of handling old tech or just any tech really, and patch management. I saw a news article that Delta and CrowdStrike are going at each other, and that kind of got me thinking about that outage and what happened there and how do you deal with it. And so, really, this broader topic of vulnerability and patch management, which is there'll be more than one episode on this, I'm sure, but at the high level it seems like we struggle here, right? It's still a massive issue for security practitioners. I don't know that it ever, again, doesn't, I don't know if we get away with from it, right?
Yeah,
Although I don't have any cassettes anymore. So,
it's
there's a
true.
point in which, some of it fades away. Um, but, but it does make you think about, okay, do we ever get to a point where patch management, vulnerability management, these things start to fade away? And I think to a degree, we have some of those things when you can build with, hardened images, or you can um, replace, do code driven infrastructure, immutable infrastructure. Yeah, there's an element of patching, there's an element of vulnerability management, but it's happening it's happening outside of the environment, right? It's happening, pre-production, if you will. And then if you do find something in production, you just blow it away and replace it with one that's patched. Um, I
Yeah.
think that's the ideal state. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with that, except that this is a big problem to solve. And when I saw that headline, it made me think about, okay, and maybe this is where to start is, what is good patch management? What does good vulnerability management look like? In 2025, kind of and beyond, what should we be doing? Um,
Oh, yeah. Loaded questions. As always. Never disappoint.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's I heard somebody say, "Oh, shouldn't even bother with vulnerability management because you can't keep up anyway." And to a degree, I think there's an element of truth there, right? There's no way you can patch 6,000 vulnerabilities, but you don't
Well,
just get rid of it, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Giving up probably not the best answer either.
that's right. I give up. I'm going to be hacked, so might as well just open the back door.
Right, right. Yeah, maybe not go that far, but yeah, certainly. I mean, there definitely is a problem. Dealing with many vulnerabilities, it can be very overwhelming. So, yeah, there's definitely an element of prioritization in there, and talking about what good looks like. Definitely understanding what's out there, but prioritizing and really understanding impacts. We talk to customers about this a lot when we first turn something on, like a CSPM tool, right? You get overloaded almost with issues, vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, right? All kinds of stuff. Some of it's more important than others, and it's a whole big job to sort through, prioritize, tune, figure out what really is important. And in the vulnerability space, it's even larger of a problem where you might have vulnerabilities in something that you're not even really using. So that happens a lot in the software world, right? You might have a vulnerability in a package or a third party library or something. When your application actually executes, that particular package isn't even really being used. So, is it there? Yes. Is it used? Maybe not. And does that change the priority of needing to patch it and update it? So, and yeah, there's then a whole bunch of things that go into patch management and being able to make updates, in the legacy world, or the world you and I spent, I'm sure, a lot of time in. I remember many patch Sundays for myself where everything had to be rebooted and shut down, and it was this whole big process to test and make sure everything came back up. And ideally, that's kind of gone away, although I know it's not completely gone. But the idea of having these continuously updating systems, automated QA testing that's happening on a new portion or a new pod in our Kubernetes cluster, right? So that gets spun up automatically with the latest and greatest, gets tested automatically, gets rolled out, almost invisibly to the end user or the users of our applications. And so that's sort of being the new quote ideal state. But it can take a lot to get there, to get to that state.
Yeah, I mean, the ideal state, I think everybody knows, um, or at least we're all working that way. But I think where some of our gaps are is tooling maybe hasn't caught up too, right? Is there's still a lot of like, you talk to folks like, oh, I'm running a vulnerability scanner, or maybe they're running Qualys or Rapid7, something like that, right? Um, and creating this backlog of vulnerabilities. And I'm sure those tools have changed some. I personally haven't used them recently, so maybe somebody that watches this will say, oh no, Rapid7 has a way to do what I'm about to ask, which is, yeah, kind of what you said, right? Which is where in the path is this vulnerability, and what's the likelihood that something like that gets exposed, right? In other words, okay, I used the Ubuntu Docker image as the foundation, and so there's what was that? What the big one the other day, a few months ago, the X encrypt uh, zip, I think it was the zip thing, right? Built into Linux.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. One of
so
those
okay, that's
utilities.
yeah, so it's there, it's a vulnerability, but doesn't matter. Like, what's the likelihood that it gets exposed in your environment? And so I think that's the piece that we need to be thinking about today is what really matters. And so I think that's where Wiz and Google and um, Palo and some of these other like more modern CNAPs, like they're starting to say, hey, we need to focus on, yes, the vulnerabilities because it matters, but more so on where this thing sits and is how likely this thing is to be exposed. And so they're starting to bring kind of that perspective. I think that's one of the things Wiz started with, right? Was like, we're looking at the vulnerabilities. That is what we do. Um, but we're looking at it in the lens of like where these things sit, what infrastructure components they're inside of, that kind of thing, right? So, and then
Yeah,
how things are configured. So you're getting this view of, is it likely that this is going to even get broken into? Which one's the highest priority? So I don't know. I feel like I'm not being clear about what I what I need to say. So this may be a terrible episode. For that, I apologize. Um, but just patching principles. You mentioned, Patch Sunday. Um, I think there's still a need for it. I think we still live in a time where, so even though all of what we just said is true, they still need to think that way to a degree, right? So the outage, the CrowdStrike outage, that caused a lot of damage for a lot of people, and part of that is testing, right? You still need that patch Tuesday, you still need or patch Sunday or whatever day you do it, right? And I always did mine on Tuesday night, so it was patch Tuesday for me before Microsoft started making it patch Tuesday.
it's still
um,
your idea.
that's right. Just gonna put that disclaimer out there, and we would go in and we'd have A groups and B groups for patching. And so that way, if I did break stuff, I didn't break everything,
Yeah,
Um, the challenge, I think, with like the CrowdStrike outage is you're rolling up, and this is kind of where they got in trouble, right? We got into the habit of rolling out definitions, which had no material impact to a machine, and doing that automatically. And so you put your endpoint security on, it's got a definition that's doing its detections. You push that out, there's really no risk in that, right? The worst thing that could happen is that definition somehow includes a file that you need, and it blocks a file and says, "Hey, you can't use explorer.exe." You're like, "Wait a second, I need that." And so then you got to go fix it. Fast forward to today, you need more deeper detection, right? We need kernel level detections in Windows and into the operating systems, and so now you've got things that are the endpoint solution is integrated into the OS, and that's essentially what happened here. Is there were issues, obviously, with the interactions between CrowdStrike and the kernel, and then it crashed everything. And well, that's a problem, right? When you're getting to that level, you let this definition just automatically roll out, but you didn't know what it was going to do to the operating system. And in a lot of customers' defense, there may not be a better way to do that, right? Because they don't separate the definitions from endpoint updates, which have kernel level access and require reboot, right? You just get the updates, and so that's maybe where the industry also needs to go is right. If it's a material update to the executables that are running the antivirus solution or the endpoint security solution, because it's more than antivirus nowadays, right? Um, then it has to go into a different batch of updates so you can manage and say, hey, that's a version update, not a patch update, and patches need to be separate from or definitions need to be separate from the patches, right? And so that way you can separate them into different groups, and you can create, and maybe this is the way it is. I'm saying all this, like that's kind of what comes to my mind is you need to manage. We still need to manage in that way. We still need to manage with that mentality of like, I don't want all these updates to hit my entire infrastructure all at the same time, whether it's to patch a vulnerability or it's a definition update. I still need some separation between the two, and some monitoring in place to make sure that if something breaks, I'm going to catch it before it goes out to that next group, right? Um, and some testing. I mean, there's things you can do to test systems and load them up, and run automations to make sure that the system functions the way it's supposed to. And I think even with all that, you're still probably not going to catch them all, right? There's still going to be
Yeah.
times where you don't catch everything, but um, yeah, I mean,
Well,
it's
and
just yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what's particularly interesting about the CrowdStrike one is that I would say most companies have all or most of what you just described in place
Yeah,
for their OS level patches, right? Like, the patch Tuesdays and Sundays and whatever days, most companies do have those kinds of things in place where it's, exactly what you described, a test group, a test plan, right? We check it before we kind of sign off for the day or the night or whatever and say, yep, everything's good to go. It's operational. Um, I think a lot of places have that for their OS updates. And what was kind of that's sort of what made
yeah,
CrowdStrike a little bit unique was thinking that we need this now for more things and realizing and understanding that the software that we utilize is in a lot more locations than just our OSs. Now it's on our third party security tools and our networking tools and all these other places, that now you have to think about those same kinds of testing and deployment and rollout policies and procedures that maybe we didn't have to think about before. So I think that's really an interesting point on the CrowdStrike one specifically. Um, and I don't think we can entirely lay that on CrowdStrike. Obviously, I don't
right.
think it's on Delta or any other organization that was impacted. Certainly, there's a ton of factors involved in all of that, and resiliency and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, from a patch perspective and just an updating perspective, it was really interesting and kind of unique to open our eyes a little bit to the world of software that's around us, and that it's in just a lot more places than we might have originally thought.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's kinda what I saw there, and actually one of the good things that might come out of the lawsuits between CrowdStrike and Delta and them going back and forth in court is we may learn what they did wrong, what they each did wrong, because I'm sure, like you said, it's complicated and it's probably not one side, right? Chances are good that, like, Delta's patch strategy had some holes in it. Chances are good that CrowdStrike's deployment strategy had some holes in it, right? That their testing had some holes in it. That Microsoft's had some holes in it, right? So like, it's not like it's just Delta and just CrowdStrike that did these things. And in fact, and every other organization that had an outage that day is in the same boat, right? To some degree, yeah, CrowdStrike maybe should have caught this. I don't know. Again, I'd have to look at the details, and maybe those more details will come out in court. Um, and I think that would be useful. I think it'd be super useful to say, okay, it is a new era in which we need deep security tools. Would that also means though that those deep security tools can break stuff. And if they're going to break stuff, then we have to manage them like we used to do Patch Tuesday, right? And then we can't just let them go hog wild and auto update all the time, right? But there's still speed needed. So on the other hand, you still also can't just
Yeah.
ignore that, right? If there's a 0 day, you got to push that 0 day update, and so we need to start separating out those detections. Maybe again, I don't know how that all should. Well, I have some ideas, obviously, on how it should work, um, but that's also not that simple either, right? So you got a 0 day export in the kernel, then you need to update the executable that ties to the kernel so that it can see it, right? So, you know, um, the yeah, maybe maybe all I'm saying is good security strategy has a lot of different pieces. You need to log all this stuff, you need to monitor all this stuff. We need to know about those 0 days and then build that into our detections. Um, threat hunting exercises, all that stuff, right? And then we also need to think about the strategy to where our endpoint solutions. I mean, it extends beyond that. Browser updates, all extensions, all these things that can wreak havoc, um, especially today with more and more stuff moving into SaaS platforms. You know, like I don't know how much of the Delta software that was running those airport solutions is SaaS based, and let's say the browser, maybe it just broke the browser, but then none of those systems worked, right, or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot of different layers to something like this that we really need to think about, and I think that's really where my head started spinning. It was like, okay, we need to kind of digest and pick these pieces apart because it's not that simple, right? You have to have this broader strategy of like, let's treat this as a rollout. Let's treat it with some testing. I do think a lot of companies skip testing, at least from the conversations that I have every day with customers when you talk about this type of stuff, even fixing vulnerabilities. Like the testing stuff still isn't quite there. And it's hard to do, right? If you don't have a good DevSecOps practice, it's really, really hard to do. Um, and even those
Yeah.
that do deploy things via code and do a lot of code-driven infrastructure, you'll still see quite a few that very limited testing happens, and so
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to write that many tests and to understand how everything works together and test it all together, right? You have unit testing and then you have kind of the combined overall functional testing of everything together. We've all seen the uh, fails or engineering fails or whatever you want to call it in buildings and or bathrooms or something where it's like this doesn't make any sense. These
that's
two
right.
things were tested individually, but they weren't tested together.
Yeah,
I can't get my hand under the soap dispenser because of where it is, or whatever. That kind
yeah,
of testing and understanding how everything works together. So yeah, it is difficult. It's not an easy process. It takes a lot of time, and it really requires a commitment. You mentioned DevSecOps and sort of going back to the culture of things. It really requires a commitment because it can seem like why are we doing all this? Why are
yeah,
we taking all this time to write all these tests? And that is a lot of the driving force behind the ability to automate and to patch quickly and roll things out quickly. Those tests are super critical part of that. And so if you don't have them or you don't spend the time to make them worthwhile and continuously also update them and iterate on them as you learn things like this, right? Unfortunately, incidents do happen and
yeah,
things we experience downtime, but that continuous learning from those things is also really, really important. Taking those lessons learned and implementing them into your day-to-day processes and procedures. And that applies across security. That's
yeah,
something you learn in incident response. If you have a breach of some sort or an event that triggers, right? That actually doesn't even apply only to patch management, but it certainly applies there too. So
yeah,
yeah, some of these broader security principles start to come into play in testing, resilience, making sure your backups are good, you're running tabletop exercises to understand, okay, what if this happens? What if we have a problem here? What's the impact of that? Can we recover quickly? Can we fail over somewhere? Yeah, all of those things are important, but to your point, often unfortunately neglected just because of the difficulty or the time involved, or they just never make it to the top of the priority list
Yeah.
in a world full of other priorities. So, yeah, it's a fun conversation. There's no easy clear cut answer of like it's super black and white. You just do ABC and you'll be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never that simple.
Yeah, and I think we want it to be, and that is an area where AI can definitely help us, right? Is because it does take so much time to write these tests, and again, I think that's why most people never get around to it. Is great, I'm ready to deploy, and now I need to write a test for this thing, and no one's going to hold up production because the test isn't written. Um, we probably should, right? There's probably degrees of that to which we should, but this is an area where I've definitely been thinking about using the use of AI or Gen AI to help, right? Because you can write better code that includes the testing phase, or better deployment pipelines that include testing phases by leveraging those things. And so, if we can speed up the process of generating the code to run the tests, that makes it easier then to do that and start saying, okay, well, at least we got the patch, it deployed, and let's say you want to get your CrowdStrike updates out in an hour, right? Um, well, then we need a test that says, okay, there's this group over here of test machines that run, and they look like production. The patches go to them first within 5 minutes, wherever that time frame is. Right, as soon as they come in, they hit these machines. Every time that happens, this test kicks off to make sure that X, Y, and Z is happening. The systems are up, et cetera, et cetera. And then after an hour of successful running, then it releases the patch to the wilderness. Those types of things, right? So that's the kind of stuff that we can start doing now with Gen AI. So this is one of those areas where I think we really can make use of this stuff in a meaningful way to make our lives a little bit more secure. Is by doing that, because yeah, that adds to your resiliency, right? Because now I'm not going down because of this, or I'm less likely to go down because of a patch or a misconfiguration or whatever it is, right? And just speed that process up. And so, and then also I'm going to know that, like, hey, if somebody goes out and manually updates this thing, it just failed in test. And so, somebody calls the help desk and says, oops, the system's down and it's not working. Like, okay, uh, did you up install updates? Oh yeah, I did. Okay. All right. We know exactly what
Right.
happened.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I would say kind of going back to the what does good look like. I would say first have a plan. Start thinking about it if you haven't already. Have some sort of a policy, have a plan, sit down and have a conversation with your business leaders, your the folks that run the applications, the owners of those applications, other stakeholders that are involved. Start talking through these things. Use CrowdStrike and Delta as your example if you want. You need that to get the conversation started, but start making that plan, start having those conversations. Secondly, I would say, you know, uh, start start doing something, scanning, looking for those vulnerabilities. To your point earlier, Rocky, there are definitely tools out there that are doing this. They're getting better and better with the
Yeah.
use of AI, especially being built into those tools. So start looking at those things. If you already have one, great. Maybe ask some questions to that particular vendor about what's coming and what's on their roadmap, how it might be getting better. But just start, right? Start
Yeah.
something. Start to understand what do you look like to the outside world, from an attacker's perspective. Get that external view along with that internal view, and then thirdly, prioritize the things that you discover and start working your way through that remediation, and doing so regularly. I think those are kind of the three super important things when we talk about patching, vulnerability management.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. I think, those are critical elements of making sure that you're not missing something that is important. and especially today, that external view is becoming so much more important, right? Is we need to set some priority on these on where we focus our time, and we can't chase 6,000 vulnerabilities, right? But we can spend time improving our release pipelines, our CI/CD pipelines that build these things and release them into the public, and then we can spend time on the higher critical, attack paths that are out there, and start working backwards from there into, okay, let's resolve this. Yes, let's resolve it as fast as we can, but let's also not lose sight of the fact that the best resolution is one that builds in from day zero all the protections needed to keep us from getting here in the first place, right? And use tools like artificial intelligence, Gen AI, right, to help you get all that done, get it done in a meaningful way, get it done quicker. Um, and we're going to see more and more of that in the tooling, obviously, as well. Like you said, John, right? In the next in the next year, right? All these tools are going to have some
Yeah.
elements of these things built in, and so you know, we're going to start seeing more and more of this. But don't we can't. I think we're still in this time where we can't rely on the tools. We can't rely on the vendors to do this either, right? Like there are smart people that are working on these things. Good. We want the tools to get smarter. Yes, but we need to build that trust and we need to validate. And so the validation is going to be the key. So I guess that's where we leave it, is like, start focusing on these things. Yes, still keep track of your vulnerabilities, but think about it more in the possibility of attack, right? What are the chances that this path gets attacked? And are there vulnerabilities in this path that make me likely to be attacked, or me be compromised? And then how do I mature my program of vulnerability management and then shifting left from a security perspective so that there's fewer and fewer vulnerabilities making their way into production. And so that if their stuff does get through, or if new vulnerabilities are found and then patched, I can quickly replace that infrastructure with newer patched infrastructure that's not going to break things, right? And so then I need testing along the way, all those things. So I think that's kind of your modern vulnerability management, patch management methodology, is kind of the combination of all those things. And then, yeah, obviously be looking at your tools to improve and start including more and more of the Gen AI stuff, the AI response, the AI detections, all that kind of stuff. So I guess
Yeah.
that's where we leave it.
That's it. Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
all.
Beginning of a conversation that will take some more in-depth looks at some of the tools and some of the processes along that line. But yeah, it was just an interesting thought of, yeah, seeing the news on the lawsuits that are bouncing back and forth. I thought, there's a lesson here in how we handle these things, that we need to be thinking about. So thanks, brother. Always good to chat. And yeah, catch us next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Security Bros.
Thanks, brother.
Do it again. Do it again.